We are live right now, ma'am.
So a very warm welcome to all. It's a great pleasure to be here today. My name is Dr. Esther Schmidt. I'm the director of the Center for Historic Houses of India. So let me just move to the next slide. This event today is part of our lecture series, Great Minds in Heritage and Historic Houses. It is this year's fourth lecture. Yesterday we had this fabulous discussion on what makes historic buildings exciting and relevant. Other lectures we had this year was one with the former director of the Aga Khan program at Harvard University and MIT, Professor Petruccioli. And the other one was with Patrick Beatty, the color man, one of the most famous experts on anything regarding paint. So you probably know him, especially our colleagues from the United Kingdom. What we hope to do with these lectures is also to really stimulate a global discourse in heritage. And I usually invite people where I believe they have really made a major contribution, are very innovative and creative in what they do, and are really inspirational. Especially in India, the heritage sector is still something very new. And I find we've made a kind of difference in the field, because before that, heritage and historic houses were mainly associated with architecture and conservation. And with the internship program that we do in heritage education that we promote, we really changed this by having a much wider view of heritage, including such discipline as law, journalism, for example, the humanities, history, and management, and economics as well. And finding and offering opportunities in heritage as a career option. The center is very, very young. I founded it only in 2019, so it's really a baby. And we've grown very much in the past 2 years. This year we became a national expert heritage body. We're not even 3 years old. I'm very happy about this. And you should know that with independence, there were only 4 national expert heritage bodies, and an amendment was made earlier this year, and we were included. This is really a great, great honor. So I hope we'll be able to live up to that expectation. We have 2 well-known lecture series that we started during the pandemic. One is called Resilience, Historic Houses of India and Their Custodians. And you can see from this that we are really there to research, represent, and help the privately owned historic houses of India. We are really the first institution to give them a forum and to let them speak. And in many cases, these lectures were the first public introductions about the family and about the historic houses. We've done 26 of them. They've been viewed by over 20,000 people across the world, and have really created this kind of family of owners of historic houses and people who love heritage and work in this field. The other one is, of course, the Great Minds lecture series that we have today as well. And we also are very interested in the digital sphere. We work with JP Morgan Chase. We are currently creating a dating app for historic houses. This is quite fun and exciting, where people can meet the kind of house that they like and find each other, and hopefully also have a number of young people engaged in this. We are a member of INTO, the International National Trust, since last year, and we really like this kind of global dialogue, not only between East and West, but between historic houses and the heritage sector across the world. So today, our speakers, and I'm very excited, we've been in correspondence for a long time, but never quite met in one event. So this is it today. Ben Cowell, the Director General of the Historic Houses Association, which in many ways is a real inspiration for everyone else to follow in these footsteps. So it's really fantastic what you do. I observe what you do, follow you. I'm really very enthusiastic about everything you do. And not only that you manage historic estates, advise them, but you also really are very active as an academic, as a thinker. You publish really important work in the field. It's quite an inspiration. Thank you for being here. You have a background also with the National Trust. We have this, of course, close kind of relationship with the National Trust. And then we have Alfonso Pallavicini, who grew up in Vienna, which is a place where I lived for many years and studied as well for some time, who is the president of the European Historic Houses Association. And Alfonso, maybe you both can tell us a little bit about the institutions you represent as well. And it's incredible to hear about the huge numbers of houses. Just to give you an example, we started slowly. We are working with kind of 90 palaces, so we are really at the very beginning. And of course, you have a vast number, so I'd love to hear from you how you do this, how you stay in touch, and how you help them and advise them. That would be really meaningful to us. I wanted to share also what benefit or what kind of prompted this talk today, and to think about who could benefit from non-visitor related business concepts. So one is what you see here. So I was often invited, and this is an extreme scenario, of course, to visit some historic houses, and very often they are in remote areas. They require a lot of funds for restoration. In the meantime, they just sit. So people kind of wait and they think maybe we turn it into a hotel, but there's no other consideration. And I think it's a great shame to just leave the houses like this and don't do anything with them, especially the house itself is already a brand. It has a name, it has a history to it, and usually it comes with land. And I was very inspired by the European Historic Houses study on the parameters of assessing historic houses, looking, for instance, at whether they have land, their location, and so on. Maybe if we have the time, Alfonso, if you could talk a little bit about this. So obviously, the buildings who benefit from this are smaller properties who wouldn't have so many visitors, but who can still use this building to generate income. Or properties that may not have the fund for restoration, they could still use the house already. Or maybe properties that have a lack of visitors. Or maybe if the location is unfortunate, it's remote, or the weather condition doesn't permit many visitors, or we have an extreme situation like the pandemic. So this is really kind of the framework and the starting point for today's discussion. And also, I think, while I thought about this during the pandemic, while we are going out of the pandemic and everyone had a focus on virtual events, I wanted to talk about and maybe have a discussion about how these kind of online events and hybrid events can actually generate income. And I wanted to mention these two examples just very briefly. One is in Europe, the Palazzo Parisio in Malta, and the other one is Nila House in Jaipur. So Palazzo Parisio was very creative, I thought, during the pandemic. They did, for instance, concerts without an audience that they live streamed on Facebook. And with this, they generated a lot of buzz and kind of on social media, but they also helped musicians to play who wouldn't have an income. And they combined it with a food delivery service. And they kind of changed from, let's say, high-end events and weddings to very simple things such as a pizza delivery service or breakfast service. And I thought that was a wonderful idea and very, very creative. Nila House, for instance, did online workshops. They were paid, and you see many of the online events are actually free. So they were paid, and what they did is they were selling kits that you would need, for instance, to do, let's say, block printing or something like that, which I also thought was a really splendid idea. So you could sell something and at the same time do the kind of virtual workshop. So with this, I'd like to hand it over to Ben. Then afterwards, Alfonso will talk about a case study, and afterwards we'll have a discussion and maybe come back to some of the things that I raised.
Thank you very much. I will try and share my screen now because I have some slides of my own to present. You can see that okay?
Yes.
I hope. Good. All right. So thank you very much indeed for your kind introduction. And I hope some of the things here will be of interest, or indeed of relevance. But obviously the UK is very different from the context of India. And we will need to see how much relevance there is in some of the examples I will show you. But I'm talking to you from the UK. My name is Ben Cowell. I'm the Director General of the Historic Houses Association, or as we call ourselves today, simply Historic Houses. It does what it says on the tin, as it were. And just to explain who we are a business association of owners of historic properties, houses, but also parks and gardens, and generally places of historic interest. But most of our members and our main members are the owners of these beautiful houses. We are really referring to the house. And in the UK, we have a listing system, a designation system, and we accept membership from, generally speaking, grade 1 and grade 2 star houses. So these are the most special examples of heritage within the UK. And we have something like 1,500 of these places. The property here is a property in Yorkshire, in England. This is Scampston Hall, very fine house with a very fine garden and grounds as well. And that's just one example of 1,500 properties, as I mentioned, across the UK. Now, what holds these properties in common? Well, the first thing is we don't own a single one of them. We are simply the representative body for these wonderful places. They are all independently, privately owned. We don't tend to have places owned by the government. We have a few local authority, local government-owned properties, very few indeed. Some charities, about 50 or so of the houses that we're talking about are set up as charities, a small proportion, in other words. Most of them purely privately owned houses. Some of them are completely private homes. It's not a condition of membership that you have to be open to the public by any means, but a good number of these places are open to public access and enjoyment in some way. And the thing that unites them all in particular is that they are all family houses. They're places that people live in. So this is the mantra we use at historic houses. These places are not museums, but they're living examples of history. They're places where family life continues to unfold. And I think that gives them a different perspective on issues of heritage. These are places where change is a constant, because family life continues to change and evolve and new generations come along. And so these places are interesting because they're examples of heritage where change is constantly happening and places are constantly evolving and adapting to new circumstances. Just to show you a map of Great Britain, we in fact cover the United Kingdom as a whole, so Northern Ireland ought to be on here, but this is showing the places within England, Scotland and Wales that are open to public access. These are places you can, as a visitor, make a visit, perhaps using the Historic Houses membership card if you happen to have joined as a visitor member. And the point is, these houses are across the entire country. They're geographically very, very dispersed. And the ones highlighted on this map are simply the 300 or so who are open to day visitors. I know today we're not talking about visiting, we're talking about other models of running these houses, but you can see the diversity of these places. They're all very different in size, in scale, in age. You can see the middle house on that picture there is perhaps quite famous in other countries as well. This is the home of Downton Abbey, the TV series that is, I think, sometimes known in other countries as well. And that's Highclere Castle in Berkshire. But the house at the top there is a good example of a historic houses type place, a very nice, very large mansion property on the Norfolk coast in England. And this is Holcombe Hall, still lived in by the same family who built it about 300 years ago. And in the setting of a traditional English landed estate with farmland, but also park and garden in the immediate surrounds of the house. But many of our member properties are much smaller propositions than that. And if you join us as a visitor member, you're encouraged to visit many of these places. You get our magazine 4 times a year. You can download the app onto your phone and find out places to visit. But as I mentioned today, we're not so much talking about visiting as other sorts of business model that can apply. Now, during the last 2 years, clearly, those models have been tested. We've all been tested in terms of the sustainability and resilience of these sorts of properties. This house is Nebworth, which is the home of our president, Martha Lytton Cobbold. It's not too far from London. It's a famous house in a way for diversification, because Nebworth is famous for its rock concerts. Ever since the 1970s, they've diversified in the business of live entertainment. The Rolling Stones and the Queen and all sorts of bands, Pink Floyd, have played at Nebworth. But this is a picture of Nebworth being advertised by the government, because the government in the UK very generously ran a scheme during the worst parts of the pandemic, a scheme called the Culture Recovery Fund, which was giving grants, emergency grant funding, to these sorts of places, these important historic buildings that needed money spent on them for repairs and for restoration. And that money helped to keep local businesses employed during the darkest days of the pandemic. And the government in the UK was generous, because it operated the furlough scheme to enable members of staff to be retained and continue to receive an income even if they were not able to go to work. And all of that was happening during the darkest days of the pandemic in the last 2 years. But we are talking about as we emerge from the pandemic, as we get used to a world in which COVID is perhaps endemic, still causing problems, but actually places are now once again open. How do we think about perhaps looking again at the visitor model and thinking of new ways of doing business if you're a historic house? So this is simply to identify some of the areas that I've picked up on here in the UK as part of historic houses. We ran a conference earlier this year in February, I think it was, in London, and it was all about the business of business diversification. What are the different methods in which house owners, custodians of houses, can try to solve that problem, which is the same problem all over the world? How do we find the revenue, the income, to sustain the historic asset that for which we are responsible? This is the same problem wherever you are in the world. And it's particularly, of course, a problem for anyone who happens to be the owner of one of these mansion properties. And these are some of the different ways in which owners find they can raise revenue without necessarily relying on tourism income. So the first of them is a classic: weddings. We think about a third of our members at historic houses offer their sites, their houses and their gardens as venues for wedding events. Now, during the COVID pandemic, weddings were one of the biggest industries to be really hit hard by COVID restrictions in the UK anyway. The government imposed limits on weddings. Weddings could not take place except in very unusual and rare circumstances. There were limits on the numbers of guests. At one point, it was no more than 6 people could attend. It became, I think, something like it went up to 15 or 16, and then it went up to 30. And only at the last minute were weddings permitted once again. Now, the picture here is of a wedding at a property in England. This was a very big wedding that I think took place in October 2020. The limits on weddings still existed at that time, and the owner got round those limits by having a drive-in wedding. The guests, I think there was about 150 guests, arrived in their cars. The couple paraded among the guests in a golf buggy, and there was no human interaction. All the action was on the screen, and that's how that particular wedding was managed. But weddings normally are big business in the UK. During the pandemic, there was a permission for wedding ceremonies to be able to take place outdoors. Before then, that was not permitted. You had to have your wedding ceremony itself indoors, but that's now been made a permanent change to the regulations, which we're very pleased about. And there are ongoing changes happening to weddings in England anyway, in terms of the venue for those weddings. Many more outdoors weddings are likely in future, but weddings, as I say, are big business, as are events generally. And this is another picture from Nebworth of a big corporate event that took place earlier this year, once the pandemic restrictions were coming off, and the property was advertising itself to companies to hold their staff away days, in this case, using tents in the grounds of the house. Here again is Nebworth. This is their drive-in cinema event that took place during the COVID pandemic. Again, another enterprising way to use the space available at Nebworth. So let me go on to some other examples. Along with weddings comes the whole issue of accommodation. And this has been a booming area in the UK. Sometimes accommodation within the house, sometimes leasing the house for guests to stay in the property. Sometimes it's accommodation in the vicinity of the house. It's lodges, cottages, property, farmhouses, property that comes with the main house that can be adapted for use as holiday accommodation. And this has been a growth area in the UK. Certainly all of these places are fully booked up this year. I think we're seeing in the UK a very slow return to international tourism coming into the UK, and still a very strong what we call staycation, domestic holiday market, with people booking holidays at very nice venues. And owners are experimenting with different sorts of accommodation. This is the accommodation you find at the Knepp estate in Sussex, famous for its rewilding experiments. This is where they've abandoned farming and wildlife is coming back, and you can come on a Knepp safari and stay in one of these little huts in the grounds of the Knepp estate and enjoy the wildlife. And some very interesting and unusual examples as well, such as this one from Northern Ireland. This is a converted Swiss Army truck in the grounds of Larchfield House. It even has its own sauna in the back of it. So some interesting, enterprising examples of accommodation being offered. The third example was retail. This is the farmers market at Doddington Hall in Lincolnshire. And Doddington has made a reputation for being a retail centre. People visit Doddington from far and around, not just to shop in the farm shop, but also to maybe shop in their cycle shop. Here's a picture of James Birch, our former president, who is very proud of his cycle warehouse built in the grounds of Nebworth. But alongside that, you've got a restaurant, you've got a home decoration shop, there was a clothes shop there, all sorts of retail opportunities at spaces within the vicinity of Nebworth, and there's of Doddington, and lots going on besides, because they're also embarked on a rewilding project at the moment, and there are cycle paths that get you to visit Doddington, and it's a very diverse set of opportunities that you can now find there. This is an example of a property that has used the brand of the estate. This is Gordon Castle in Scotland, who sell a range of merchandise and produce, not only at the house itself, but also online. And the online business of Gordon Castle is now quite big, and they're selling their own bespoke range of products to fans and tourists across the world. And food and drink is big business as well for many of our member properties. This is Dean's Court in Dorset, that had a disused squash court in the grounds and converted it not only into a very nice gift shop, which is what you can see in the picture here, but also into a very attractive cafeteria where produce is made on site, often using food grown in the kitchen garden, but it's sold to casual visitors who might turn up and have a coffee and a slice of cake. And Other places are turning themselves to things like cookery schools, baking schools. This happens a lot. This is an example from Welbeck in Nottinghamshire. So lots of people are interested these days, not so much in visiting as in experiences, and the experience of learning to bake in a well-appointed kitchen in one of these historic places is very attractive. Here's another example. This is Iford. Alfonso knows the owner of Iford. This is William Cartwright Hignet's house, and he has turned to cider making and the pop-up cider sales at different festivals in the southwest of England. You can often find Iford cider being sold there. Another example, Burley doing an outdoor food market. Again, this is about, to some degree, this is about visiting, but it's about a different sort of visiting experience, a retail experience, if you like. I mentioned gardens. This is the gardens of Dean's Court in Dorset. Using organic cultivation methods, the gardens rely on volunteers, and the volunteers get as much out of it as the people who might enjoy the produce. I know that Dean's Court sell vegetable boxes in the local area every week, and that's how they keep the gardens going. And this is the garden of Gordon Castle, a very fantastic walled garden, very productive space. And Gordon Castle won our Garden of the Year competition last year. So a particular area of interest at the moment in the UK is energy. And these are a few slides about that. This is the roof of Tissington Hall in Derbyshire, a flat roofed property that eventually was able to put solar panels on the roof, not after a degree of quite a lot of debate and discussion with the local planning authorities, but these solar panels help to make Tissington a much more sustainable proposition. And I'm finding that this is happening in other places too. So this is a property I was visiting last week. Again, it's in Dorset. This is a place called Athelhampton. And on the left-hand side, you can see there the air source heat pumps. There's 10 of them installed in the last, I think, in the last 12 months in a very discreet location at the back of the property. Managed to get planning permission quite easily, I think. But that is helping to provide the heat to the house. And in the bottom picture there, you can see the picture of the solar panels in the kitchen garden. So kitchen gardens in the UK often found connected to these houses, and they're designed, they were always historically designed to capture the sun's rays, to promote the growing of produce. And now they're being used to harvest the sunshine and turn it into energy. And at Athelhampton, I also saw the bank of Tesla batteries that is soaking up the energy, turning it into electricity, and that electricity is being put back into the national grid, and the property is earning some money from that. So you can integrate energy, renewable energy, into these sorts of historic spaces in quite interesting ways. I think that's a growing area of interest, certainly in this country. Now, the last couple of slides are really about media. This is Julie Montague, who has made a name for herself at Mapperton, another Dorset property as it happens. But she is, having had a TV series, Julie is now offering people online the chance to watch what she's up to. And that is a way of, I suppose, welcoming people into your house without physically having to welcome visitors in. Julie can show people around all sorts of interesting places, and she's made a real reputation for herself doing exactly that. Selling the property for film and TV work is a traditional staple of the income of these sorts of places. They're often used for example, for period dramas. This is Chavenage in Gloucestershire, which was the venue for a TV series called Poldark that was on our TV screens a few years ago. And this house in Wales, Gwyck Castle, was also being used during the COVID lockdown as the venue for the ITV series I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here. They normally go off to exotic locations, but they had to stay in the UK, and that the money from that was used to restore that amazing North Wales house. And there's an interesting kind of use being made, I think, of online media. So this is Blenheim Palace, which during COVID was offering guided tours of the palace remotely by Zoom. You could be walked through this 3D recreation of the house by the curator. A historian was showing you around a very important property. I think it was something like £40 a ticket, but you had a personal guided tour of the property without actually having to go there. And so there were people from the UK, but also from the USA and other places as well. It'll be interesting to see how much of this continues. Certainly, there's a lot more content available online, whether on Instagram or Facebook or TikTok even. But obviously, a lot of that is free. It's free content. It's designed to help attract people to maybe consider visiting the house at some point. But it's a growing area. But again, to go back to Mapperton, I think Mapperton are very interesting. If you know the website Patreon, they are actually running a subscription service, and you can see there different levels of membership, and different levels attract different sorts of benefits. The main benefit of which is regular updates from Julie and from Luke Montague about their travels. Her series, Julie's series, is called The American Viscountess. But they are finding, I think, that this is a regular source of income for them. And I think this is going to be a growing area for heritage of all kinds as we get used to this hybrid world in which we are these days living. Perhaps one day visiting will be purely remotely and not through actual visiting on the ground. So I think that's more or less it. That's the end of my slides. And so I'm looking forward to hearing how much of that might have resonated both with Alfonso and with our other guests from India and elsewhere. So I'll stop my screen now.
Thank you very much, Ben. This was absolutely fascinating, and of course, lots of points for discussion. One of the very important points you made, I think, was that people are actually not so much more interested in visiting, but in experience. And I think this is true in many other aspects of managing the house and heritage interpretation and so on. And it goes back to our event yesterday. A wonderful phrase, Ben. And then also interesting to focus on temporary solutions. I think this is really undervalued and neglected. You gave the example of the accommodation at NEP, or the, using a car or something like this. And there are many other ways of using temporary solutions as business models in historic houses. Also fascinating to see the transformation from the kitchen garden to renewable energy spot. And this is really an example of how to reinterpret the wisdom of the past. And it's not always inventing something totally new, but just looking at it from a different angle. Fascinating. I hope we can come back to this later. I'd like to now ask Alfonso to share his presentation with us.
Hello, everyone. I'm Alfonso Pallavicini. As my name says it, I'm Hungarian, and I grew up in Austria, so I'm actually a real European. I'm a big mixture of many countries. I'm the president of European Historic Houses. European Historic Houses is the umbrella organization for many of the European Historic Houses associations, like Historic Houses in England, but we have in every country almost one or more association. We regroup mostly the private historic houses, and we were set up to be a lobbying organization towards the European decision-making sites here in Brussels, the Parliament, the Council, and the Commission. But actually, we were a bit more than just a lobbying organization. We tried to help the members, so the national associations and their members, in everything which cannot be done nationally because it is on a pan-European basis. We started a next generation group a European next generation group, which works very well. Why this idea? Because without the next generation, our houses will be dead. They will be sold. There are so many challenges that the young people rather look for exciting careers in tech than to do something out of their house. I think we need to help them to understand what they could do and push them towards taking over those jewels which might be gone otherwise because of the decision of one generation. We have as well overall a networking role. We want to create a old boys and old girls network of our probably 50,000 members, if you count all the members of our members together, so that the Brits meet the Danes to see what they do in Denmark, how they're able to transform their houses, what type of business ideas they have. Same thing, the Portuguese and the Swede. We wanted to do it in the last years, but of course, COVID had a huge impact on traveling and on meeting. So we will hopefully be able to do it in the next 2 or 3 years. I don't have a structured presentation, but I think that Ben gave a very good overall view. I think that as in many fields, the Brits are the most business-minded. I see the British Association as a very modern association in Europe. And I think that many of the tools and the business ideas they have are being copied in other countries in Europe. The head of the Next Generation Group was William Cartwright, a Brit. Why did we choose him? Because he is generations before many other countries. So I think that what I've seen in Europe, that there might be a few other ideas, is that in some countries they use those estates for education, all sorts of education. It's of course wonderful places. You can get people staying in there and earning money from it, be it schools, be it languages, be it whatever. It's a very good business business way. The other thing is Europe is turning much more into, as you saw it, nature. So hunting, riding, staying outdoor in nature, just enjoying the space. Europe has less and less space. People want to see spots where you don't see 1,000 people around you. Yes, where you can walk, where you can hear the birds sing. So otherwise, I think I will repeat what has been already said, but we had the luck to be financed by the European Commission and the European Parliament a few years ago to do the first pan-European study on heritage houses and what they mean for the economy and for the social life of Europe. You can find this study by going into our site, europeanhistorichouses.eu. It was a deep research, but in the end, what came up is that those houses are very beautiful, are the image of Europe, are the image of our history, but are often not financially sustainable. And I don't think we should count on the state to help us because that will never happen. We need to count on us. And the study showed that actually what's lacking with with many of the owners is the capacity to become an entrepreneur. It's due to historic reasons. The families living in those houses often were financed by huge land, so agricultural, forestry ownerships, which financed the house. The house was not a means by itself; it was just a place where you lived in a very nice way. History changed a lot, and today those houses in many countries do not have the land around them. So ownership of land and the house was cut. And owners needed to find ways to make the house a business by itself. So live and make money out of it, or at least be able to finance the costs of the house. So the lack is often entrepreneurship and the education, the basic education to understand the business and what it means to make money out of it. We have in Europe some of the associations who have education on it, be it structured or just networking. So they show cases and people try to understand from those cases what they would do. So like what we're having today. We are hoping to be able on a European level to launch a education system fully web-based, so virtual, for the members of our members to actually get the basic knowledges of economics, the basic knowledges of marketing, to see best practices and to try and pick and choose and do what they want. We cannot make the owners entrepreneurs, but we can give them the base to understand what they could do and if it's actually profitable. But when you are an entrepreneur, what's the next thing you need is financing. You cannot start the businesses, for instance, James Birch did in Doddington Hall, and I was there. It's unbelievable. He has, I think, 200 employees. Yes, he created it. You need financing, but you need the entrepreneurship capacities and then the structuring capacity, so to find the financing from third parties. And last but not least, but I think you have this problem less in India, is you need to find personnel. So that's a key issue in Europe. You don't find personnel anymore. So you might have businesses, and many of those businesses are very personnel heavy, whatever has to do with retail, with accommodation, with festivities. So many of our houses have today an issue that they might have built up very nice businesses, but they don't find the people to run them anymore.
Yes,
so
we don't have this problem in India. This has been really fascinating, Alfonso, and I'm looking forward to seeing this web-based, educational tool, for economics, marketing. So that's really fantastic. And I think because of what you said, and this is also what I realized here, because I want to have the element of entrepreneurship in the historic houses sector. I'm creating this group of young entrepreneurs, such as JJ, who's here, and I'd like you to join the conversation now. He just graduated in economics from Cornell, and there are a number of others. Yeshwant, Richard Volker is here. If you have the chance to speak and participate, it's very inspiring what you're doing with Mahalia Ford and everything else. So I have a number of young second generation, next generation people who are helping out with the building up of the Center for Historic Houses and this kind of promotion of entrepreneurship in the heritage sector. Maybe Jide, just tell us a little bit about your experience, and is the camera on, is it working? And because you just returned recently to India from the United States, maybe you tell us a little bit about Kota, the family estate, and what you're planning to do.
Yeah, sure. Hi, so can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, so I've been back in India for a few years now. So it's definitely been a interesting transition to come back. And the challenges are certainly very similar to what Mr. Cowell and Mr. Pallavicini described, to essentially create viable business models which can generate enough revenue, and then allow owners to essentially expense out maintenance at the very least, and in addition to the business part, what I'm sure everyone else will also attest to is all the other parts of it. So like getting the right licenses and the legal side of things and all of that. So all of those challenges are also things that sort of create barriers and challenges that everyone has to overcome. But so more specifically for Kota, so Kota is sort of not quite a metro city, but it's certainly not difficult in terms of access either. It's about a 5-hour train ride from Delhi, and about 3 hours drive from Jaipur and Udaipur, which are the closest airports. So for us, especially given how in India a lot of the business models are certainly hospitality focused for historic houses. So whether that be a hotel, a restaurant, or banquet facilities, which of course entail weddings or other events, hospitality is a big part of historic houses businesses. And for the hospitality world, access and infrastructure certainly helps a lot. So when you're not in a metro, then you sort of have to create that story and leverage that brand and the story that about those respective properties, to sort of tell people to come and experience it in person, and try and visit and experience and see for themselves. And in addition to the hospitality side of it, a lot of historic houses and families also have museums, and various charitable organizations through which they run these museums and other initiatives. So there's all sorts of various ways where the buildings themselves and the houses themselves are sort of run still. And yeah, that's the general gist of it. So in Kota we have the fort, which has the museum in it. The fort also has schools and 2 schools and a college in it as well. We run various cultural events there. So we've also in the past organized a quiz for all the schools in the region, to sort of promote awareness and knowledge about culture and history of the region, or just do philanthropic activities like a blood donation camp or an eye camp for people. So there's various ways to sort of engage with the people. And then there's obviously also the hospitality side that I mentioned. So yeah, that's a quick overview.
If I can just share a few figures. Thank you so much, JD, for sharing this. Let's say Jaipur has a City Palace Museum has about 1,400,000 visitors a year. Miranga 2,400,000, and Mysore even 5 million visitors a year. So these are, we have a lot of visitors in India, and the historic houses have more visitors than museums. So that's, and now imagine this is breaking away now during the pandemic, and many of them were closed for a year or so. So this was an extremely tough situation. Maybe Jaidev, can you just quickly tell us about what are some of the initiatives you are planning now? And do you have any visitor numbers for Kota, which is a smaller town, but it has an extremely very, very important art collection and collection of wall paintings as well.
Yeah, so I mean, for us, we certainly are very visitor dependent. So whether that's ticketed entry for the museum, or tourists, for whether that be foreign or Indian, for the few hotel properties that we have. So we are starting to think about how to diversify away now, just because of our experience in the pandemic. So whether that be setting up retail, which Mr. Cowell also mentioned in his presentation, or try and brainstorm other ways. So retail, I think, is particularly a great way to promote local arts and culture and sort of support skilled artisans. So for us, we have Kota miniature art, as you mentioned, of some of which we have a collection at the museum of historic art pieces and paintings and that sort of thing. The art itself is kind of in danger of dying out. There's not that many people that are practicing the same miniature art. There's less than 15 of them now. So we're trying to sort of put together a program where we can sort of engage with them and support them and give them a platform to essentially generate patronage. So I think retail in particular stands out, but yeah, this is certainly a challenge that we all need to think about and try and come out better on the other side of the pandemic. In terms of visitors, we probably have, we're nothing close to what the other larger cities have. We're probably close to 40 or 50,000 in a year, at least in the past year. I'm not quite sure what the pre-pandemic numbers were, but yeah, that's roughly where we are.
Yeah, it's also the fact in India that there is, the certain triangle of tourism. There are certain places that are always on the list, and others, very important places like Bundi or Kota, are not so well known in comparison, need to be kind of discovered also, which is interesting. But also what you said is this kind of idea that we saw earlier in Ben's presentation, that you kind of revive certain traditional practices like aristocratic patronage of the arts, and you turn this into a business model. And many of the owners I've been speaking with do the same thing. They have, residency programs, they have exhibitions in their houses and so on. And I think that festivals also, or for instance, traditionally, of course, historic houses were autonomous. They produce their own food and so on, and clothes. And you have these workshops still associated with the Indian palaces. And it's very easy, in fact, to revive this idea of the workshop and then sell this both online and in shops, locally. I'd love to ask Ben and Alfonso shortly before we are coming to the end of the session. How do you see this transition from the virtual to a combination between both? And you mentioned that, of course, the virtual cannot be underestimated. It helped institutions become very well known, where others kind of were very quiet and gave up. They were very well known and then really benefited from this with the reopening. And in fact, this also happened to the Center for Historic Houses, because people were at home and could listen to the events, and it made us very well known as well. But a lot of people found it challenging to turn it into a business opportunity, because there are just so many webinars available everywhere. Maybe if you are the V&A, you can charge for an arts class, but for most people, it's not possible to charge for this. So maybe, do you have any experiences or examples, or like the example from Palazzo Parisio, which was, I think, very, very creative, combining all of these different things and tying it to something like a food delivery service. Can you think of similar ideas or programs that turn the kind of virtual world into a kind of tangible business proposition?
Well, it's Should I go first? I mean, it is. This, of course, is the magic, and if you can find it, you're onto a good thing. I think if you can make that conversion happen. But I suppose ultimately, there is no substitute for the real thing. Heritage will always be about real experiences of real places. It's tangible, real life heritage assets that people want to see. There is no substitute for the Mona Lisa, than going to see the Mona Lisa. That will always be the case, I believe. And so I suppose, and as an association, Historic Houses is, I suppose, on the same journey, because we too, during lockdown, were running our lecture series. Every week we had a free lecture because we had our members. We wanted to keep them interested and busy, and that helped to ensure that our membership was retained to some degree, and our membership is now higher now than it was before the pandemic, because I think we've made lots more friends by giving this online content and allowing people a glimpse. And now they've joined us because they want to have the chance to visit for real as well. So there is a connection between the two things, but it's not a direct connection. I love the example from Malta. I wonder how often many other examples will follow of that sort of thing. There's a magic in blending the online and the real in some way. Yeah.
And I find it is a business that works, but it's also a kind gesture behind it, because actually there was the gesture of helping the artist that was unemployed. There was the gesture of involving the local community, catering to their needs. And it turned out well for everyone. It was really a win-win situation. So it's a very kind of charming and lovely concept. Yes, I agree. Alfonso, would you like to maybe share, having the 50,000 properties in the background? I'd love to.
Oh, I don't have them. It's my associations who have them, but I fully concur with what Ben said. And personally, I think that, yes, virtual can be of use for some time. We ran as well in the pandemic Historic Houses of the Month. So it's for people to let their house know. We had some of the houses which were seen 50,000, 70,000 times. But nevertheless, I think that people want to see, feel those houses. As Ben said, it's not museums. Yes, it's private houses which have a life, a soul, because they're inhabited. Yes, you can visit them, but it's different. And the second thing is, why are people so keen on coming and seeing our properties? Because there is space. Yes, because it's big, it's phenomenal, it's art, it's the beauty of what was done in Europe in the last 400 years. You cannot experience it just digitally. You need to be there.
Indeed. And last not least, since I'm here to not only stimulate discussion between East and West and the global discourse and heritage, I'd also like to stimulate business and collaboration between the Indian historic houses and the European historic houses. And if you think of certain examples like the Maharaja of Jodhpur, his beautiful tents, you can see them in many, many beautiful garden events in London and in the UK. And so there are good opportunities. We need wine here, for instance, from Europe and other places. So I think textile industry is really interested, and I kind of like this idea of historic houses helping each other. Yeah, so we have kind of maybe some products from European houses, or Williams. What is he producing? Isn't he doing tea and a number of things?
Cider.
Cider as well.
Cider.
Yeah. And maybe you would like to have some of the beautiful textiles and so on, some of the things that may be produced in Kota and elsewhere. So I hope we can stimulate such a kind of business collaboration as well between these two continents. So
sure.
Thank you very much again for participating, for being here. And I look forward to seeing you in the future. All the very best.
It is a great pleasure. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much, Mimi. Bye-bye.